And now, God, open my mouth so that I can speak. Open our ears so that we can hear, and open our hearts so that we can change by your power and through your grace. Amen. Please be seated. I love a new beginning. I think that's why dawn is my favorite time of day. I love to be awake in the early morning just before the sun fully rises. It's sort of an in-between time. The light is only just starting to come up, and it's so quiet that it seems that you could actually hear the earth breathe. Nighttime is over. Nothing has happened yet, but soon it will. The day is on its way, and we don't always know what it will bring, but we know it will bring something. Today brings the beginning of a new year in the life of the church. We get to turn a page and begin again. I think many of us need this moment to try to move beyond fear and foreboding and to try to look ahead to something new. Every year at this time, I find myself thinking about what exactly is happening right now. Why is it that our church year starts now? It's the beginning of something, so why don't we start with the resurrection or perhaps a birth? Both are beginnings in their own right, so it would seem to make sense. But Advent doesn't mean beginning. It means coming into being. But what exactly is coming into being, and when is it going to get here? What does it mean for us, and how should we prepare for it? Our gospel doesn't seem to offer any easy answers. Jesus gives us a difficult lesson, and in doing so, reminds us that we have some work to do. He tells us to be on guard and keep alert, to keep watch for signs of the new day that God has promised, to expect that it will come and to be prepared. That sounds good, but the picture that Jesus paints today sounds pretty ominous with his imagery of distressed nations and raging seas. These are the things you should look for, he says. I felt myself getting anxious as I read it because, well, it sounds a little too realistic for me right now. It feels like for one reason or another, so many people are on edge and struggling here and around the world. People are divided and nothing feels simple right now as many among us feel anxious about what's to come in the new year. Truly, I tell you, this generation will not pass away until all of these things have taken place. At least I know what to look for now, so I won't get caught, as Jesus says, unexpectedly. But that got me thinking about the difference between having expectations and being expectant. We're so often told to be wary of expectations, especially those that are unrealistic, or we may set ourselves up to be let down or get ourselves into trouble. Expectations are things like that can be itemized and shaped into checklists. They inform much of how we live. Often they're tied to specific outcomes such as good health or relationships or success. I think that's a little bit where expectation gets a bit blurred with assumption. But expectant is more like a state of existence, a place we inhabit. We hear that word often in reference to parents awaiting the birth of a child, or as Jesus explains today, when we see the leaves begin to sprout on trees. Expectancy is that period of anticipation before something happens. Expectancy calls us to action. It's a time for watchfulness and preparation. This is what Jesus is getting at today. Bishop Andy Doyle writes that it's in this season that we Christians dare to do a countercultural thing, to prepare not for a passing season, but for the coming of an eternal season of God. In Advent, we are to be watchful to see the face of Jesus present in our midst. As I reflected on that, I began to wonder where and if most of us actually see Jesus in our midst. It seems to me that we're much less likely to look for signs that he's sitting there in the person at the entrance to Ralph's asking you if you have any change than we are here on Sunday mornings, or sitting in a chapel at the hospital where someone we love is up in surgery. We all have our places where we expect to find God. But what if Jesus can come to us at the grocery store? What if Jesus might show up at the post office or at the movie theater as you're going to see Wicked, or in the face of an unhoused woman standing behind you at Starbucks later today? Many of us may indeed appreciate that Jesus might show up in those moments, but I wonder about the moments that we don't plan for, like a cancer diagnosis, or a divorce, or a wildfire that destroys your home. I would venture a guess that there are a lot of us here today who've had moments where we were sure that God was nowhere to be found in what was going on. Can you think about how that felt? If our sense of expectation is bound up in things going the way we want and everything being okay, then there's a really good chance we may be left feeling dissatisfied. More importantly, we risk not seeing Jesus show up for us in the person that administers our chemo, or the comfort and warmth of the person who sits in silence and holds our hand when we cry, or in the courage and strength of the first responders who rush to help us when disaster strikes. You see, the promise of Advent is that there is never a moment that God cannot work with, and never a person that God cannot work through, even when there are distressed nations and raging seas. And Jesus is not simply telling us to sit back and watch for these things to happen. That sounds pretty passive, and Jesus was anything but passive. We have a role, and that role means that we have work to do. But here's the thing. If we have the potential to experience Jesus through anyone we encounter, then that must mean that anyone who encounters us has the potential to experience Jesus through us. What if Jesus is not coming back so much to us, but through us? If this is the case, then we're not the only ones who are expectant. Jesus is too. It's Jesus that's there around the next corner in every face at any moment, preparing to be discovered. That's why we start here. We need this time to allow ourselves to put down our expectations of how things are going to go and lean into a state of hopeful expectancy, with eyes and hearts wide open and not weighed down with dissipation and drunkenness and the worries of this life. Let us use this time, this short window of time, to see with new eyes and prepare for what's to come by taking on the discipline of seeking and serving Christ in all our moments. That's what makes Bishop Doyle's words so appropriate today when he wrote, "Christians in their seeing and in their praying in Advent choose to conspire against the powers that be. And so we are attentive to our ministry wherein we act on behalf of others. As we recognize Christ in our siblings, the poor, those in need, and we choose to act on their behalf, that is the diligent work of Advent." My friends, let's begin something new today. Let's step into this new year by being countercultural. Let's push back on the politics of division and discord. Let's begin to create a new way of being in this world right now. Let's use this season to bring Jesus into the world through us and the work we do here so that justice and peace may be realized for all people, so that what's broken may be healed, so that we may see God present and at work in and through all things. This is meant to be a season of hope. And so I say to you now, stand up, raise your heads. The time is coming, and Jesus draws near.